The sun had yet to rise high. The entire pine grove forest seemed sealed under a thick, freezing mist, where even a breath would instantly vanish into the ashen air. Old snow blanketed the narrow trail, crunching beneath the small boots of Lily Carter. The 6-year-old wore a bright red puffer jacket, a vivid spark of color amidst the dim, endless trees. Her cheeks flushed pink from the cold, but her wide eyes gleamed with a mixture of curiosity and worry. Suddenly, a gunshot cracked through the silent fog, sharp and jarring. Lily jolted, her small feet freezing in place on the trail. Her heart pounded against her ribs. A second gunshot echoed, followed by a flurry of forest birds scattering in panic among the pine branches. Pulling her woolen scarf tighter around her neck, Lily peered towards the source of the noise. Through the slender, towering trees she spotted 3 men in camo jackets, rifles slung over their shoulders, wading quickly through the heavy snow. Their movements were tense, eyes locked ahead on something large and shadowy in the mist. Holding her breath, Lily crept closer. And then she saw it. Trapped inside a crude iron cage was a creature Lily had never seen outside of storybooks. A massive bobcat, muscles rippling under its thick, silver-striped fur. It stood tall, back arched in defense, its tufted ears twitching at the slightest motion. Its eyes, burning amber, blazed through the mist like twin fire gems, shining with fear, fury, and a desperate plea for help. One of the men, his voice tight with panic, shouted, "Kid, stay back! It's dangerous!" The rifle in his hands trembled slightly. But Lily didn't move. By some unexplainable instinct, she felt the creature's overwhelming pain and despair. Ignoring the shouts, ignoring the danger, she dashed towards the cage, her tiny arms spread wide, placing herself between the raised rifles and the imprisoned animal. The oldest hunter stammered, "Damn it! What's it doing with the kid?" Lily stood tall, arms stretched out like a living shield between the guns and the bobcat. The massive creature stopped growling. It lowered itself onto its haunches, staring intently at the girl through the iron bars, as if recognizing something, a silent, invisible bond. In that moment, the whole forest seemed to hold its breath. The wind ceased. The birds fell silent. And every gaze was fixed on the tiny girl standing proud and fearless, like a silent warrior, facing down humanity's instinct to destroy. Only the steady thumping of Lily Carter's small, brave heart echoed through the ancient woods, red and defiant in the sea of gray. Lily Carter had never been like the other children of Pine Grove. From the moment she was born, she was a mystery. Lily didn't cry when she entered the world, she simply stared up at the hospital ceiling with wide, unnervingly calm eyes. As she grew, she rarely smiled, and she didn't babble like other toddlers. Words, hugs, and lullabies all seemed to pass through her like the first cold winds of winter, leaving no trace behind. Rachel Carter, Lily's mother, raised her alone after the sudden death of her husband in a logging accident. As a dedicated veterinarian, Rachel was no stranger to fragile lives and silent suffering. Yet even she was powerless against her daughter's strange, unbridgeable distance. Doctors diagnosed Lily with severe autism spectrum disorder. They handed Rachel thick folders of pamphlets, long lists of therapy centers, and eyes full of sympathy. But no amount of paperwork could explain the strange birthmark on Lily's wrist, a large cat paw print, each toe distinct, as if someone had carefully inked it onto her pale skin. No one could find the cause. No one could explain its meaning. Rachel tried everything to reach her daughter: music therapy, support animals, children's playgroups. But Lily remained silent, drifting further away each day, like a lone leaf carried by a cold river's current. Until the day Rachel heard about Frank Weston. Frank owned a wildlife rescue camp at the edge of town, where he cared for injured and abandoned bobcats, wolves, and other wild creatures. People said Frank was eccentric, reclusive, a bit mysterious. But in a moment of desperate hope, Rachel brought Lily to his sanctuary, and fate quietly shifted its course. They walked past the large enclosures where beasts either growled or hid. Frank led them wordlessly, as quiet as the shadow of a tree. When they reached a small, tucked-away pen beyond the pines, Frank stopped. "I have one more," he said, his voice deep and rough like wind through a canyon. It's different. Inside, a small bobcat with smoky, cloud-patterned fur sat silently. It didn't snarl or shy away, it simply watched, golden eyes following Lily from the moment she appeared. Without instruction, without prompting, Lily stepped forward, as if her whole life had been waiting for this moment. Her small hand pressed gently against the cold wire mesh. And the young bobcat, just as silently, stood up, padded forward, and placed its damp nose precisely against her hand. Rachel exhaled, tears stinging her eyes. It was the first time Lily had ever willingly reached out to another living being, without force, without fear, without retreat. Frank glanced down at Lily's wrist. When his eyes fell upon the strange paw-shaped birthmark, a flash of recognition flickered in his weathered gaze. Without any unnecessary words, he simply whispered, "The big cat has found its keeper." That day, they brought the bobcat home. Frank left behind only a name, scrawled hastily on a scrap of paper. Shadow. Shadow quickly became the center of Lily's world. In the early days at their small cabin on the outskirts of town, the young bobcat followed Lily like a true shadow. It didn't need training. It somehow knew exactly when Lily needed space and when she needed a gentle touch. Lily, who once couldn't bear the slightest contact from anyone, now often curled up against Shadow's warm fur, sleeping peacefully as if she had found her protective blanket against the cold world. And then, Shadow began to grow. Unlike any bobcat Rachel had ever seen in her veterinary career, Shadow grew at an astonishing pace. By 4 months, he weighed nearly 50 pounds, larger than an average adult bobcat. By 6 months, he stood as tall as Rachel's waist, his sleek silver-striped coat gleaming, muscles rippling under his powerful frame, and sharp, intelligent eyes glinting like a young panther. But it wasn't just his size that worried Rachel. Shadow was too smart. He learned to open doors after just a few observations. He remembered paths, signs, even responded to simple words Rachel used while talking to Lily. He never stalked Lily. Instead, he acted like a silent guardian, always standing behind her whenever strangers entered their home, his golden eyes quietly, carefully watching. One night, while Rachel was working late at her veterinary clinic, a neighbor's dog wandered into the yard. Before Rachel could react, Shadow was already standing between the house and the intruder, silent, not growling, not lunging, just staring. The dog whimpered, tucked its tail, and fled into the darkness. No fight. No sound. Just presence. But in a small town like Pine Grove, stories spread faster than wildfire. Rumors began to rise. Rachel Carter was keeping a wild beast in her backyard. The creature was as big as a calf. It wasn't a cat, it was a monster. Whispers turned to fear, and fear turned to action when a few concerned neighbors contacted local authorities. And then, on a heavy, mist-choked morning, the gunshots rang out in the forest. That scene, 3 hunters advancing through the trees, rifles raised, ready to end what they saw as a threat, was where Lily appeared, stepping between the guns and Shadow. A 6-year-old girl. A giant bobcat. A moment frozen forever in the minds of everyone who witnessed it that day. When Rachel finally arrived, almost collapsing in the snow from terror, she saw her daughter standing there, one hand outstretched, the other resting gently on the iron bars of the cage. Shadow, who should have been snarling, clawing, or trying to flee, was sitting quietly, his amber eyes gleaming with a rare, profound calm. And Lily, the girl who had barely spoken a word to another soul in her 6 years of life, lifted her voice, small but steady. "Don't hurt him. He belongs with me." In that moment, Rachel understood everything she thought she knew about the world, about the boundaries between humans and nature, about love and instinct, no longer held true. And this was only the beginning. After that day in the Pine Grove forest, everything changed, and not for the better. The townspeople, who once greeted Rachel warmly at the cafe or at her veterinary clinic, now whispered behind her back. Conversations would fall silent when Rachel and Lily entered a room. Some were more direct, sending anonymous letters demanding she Deal with the animal before something terrible happens. They called Shadow a threat. A wild beast disguised as a pet. A danger that had to be removed. One night, as Rachel was cleaning up her clinic, she found a note shoved under the door. If you won't handle it, we will. The threat pulsed beneath the cold, clipped words. Rachel knew she couldn't ignore it forever. And she knew the truth: Shadow wasn't a house cat. His size, his instincts, the way he watched the world with those sharp, ancient eyes, all of it said he belonged to the wild, not the backyard of a small cabin. With a heart heavy with sorrow, Rachel contacted Wild Haven Reserve, a vast sanctuary specializing in the care of hybrid or illegally kept wild animals. That decision shattered Lily. She screamed, pounded her fists against her mother's chest, thrashed like a soul being torn apart. You promised! You promised you'd never take Shadow away! But Rachel had no choice. Torn between her love for her daughter and her fear that a panicked town might kill Shadow, she chose the lesser cruelty. The day they said goodbye, the skies over Pine Grove hung low and gray, sharing their grief. Lily clung to Shadow's thick neck, her face buried in his silver fur, tears soaking into the warm coat. He'll be sad, she whispered. He'll wait for me. Shadow didn't struggle. He simply sat still, silent, as if understanding better than anyone that this parting was necessary, no matter how much it hurt. The sanctuary gates closed behind them with a hollow, metallic clang. A chapter of their lives had ended. But parting was only half the tragedy. Not long after, the signs began to appear. Shadow grew thin, refusing food, sitting by the gate with his lost, searching gaze fixed on the horizon. The Wild Haven staff tried everything: special food, new toys, even introducing him to other Bobcats. But nothing filled the hollow ache inside him. Meanwhile, back in Pine Grove, Lily withered too. The once quiet girl became nearly mute. Her colorful drawings turned into gray, jagged scribbles. Every night Rachel heard her daughter whisper in her sleep, "Shadow, wait for me, don't leave." Then one night, Lily spiked a fever. Strange bruises blossomed across her arms, her lips pale and drained of life. When the doctor delivered the blood test results, Rachel felt as though she were falling into an endless abyss. Acute myeloid leukemia. A rare, vicious, and deadly form of cancer. At the same time, a report arrived from Wild Haven. Shadow had developed a large tumor on his spleen. It was growing rapidly, threatening to rupture his internal organs at any moment. Two souls, bound as if by a single heartbeat, struck down by illness at the same time. Coincidence? Or a sign from the wild blood they shared? In her desperation, Rachel sought out Frank Weston once again. The old man's eyes glimmered with an ancient, urgent sorrow as he said only one thing. You don't understand, Rachel. Lily doesn't just love Shadow. The girl and the cat are one. And to save one of them, they might have to save both. Rachel Carter sat frozen in the hospital waiting room, the thin fabric of her coat trembling between her hands. Through the icy glass window, she could see Lily, small, pale, sleeping deeply on the hospital bed. A thin foreline ran into her fragile arm, no thicker than a winter twig. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a muffled sound like a call from another world. Rachel snatched it up. On the other end was Margaret Ellis, director of Wild Haven Reserve. Rachel, Margaret said, her voice strained. Shadow, he's fading. And there's something else. Logan, he found something in the genetic tests. Rachel nearly flew out of the hospital, driving like a madwoman to Wild Haven. By the time she arrived, the sky was tilting into evening. The wind whipped up tiny snow devils, but the fear knotting inside her was colder than any blizzard. Inside the reserve's laboratory, Logan Pierce, the young biologist, stood before a glowing computer screen, blue light casting deep shadows across his tense face. He pointed to two swirling strands of DNA on the monitor, one from Lily, one from Shadow. They almost perfectly matched in a small segment, a mutation not recorded in any known human or animal genome. We're calling it the bridge gene, Logan said, his voice catching. Some kind of ancient genetic link. A bridge between two species. Rachel stared, stunned. You mean, they're truly connected? Logan nodded gravely. Not just spiritually. By blood. By essence. When one weakens, the other fades too. Margaret stood beside them, her voice raw. If we only save Lily, Shadow will die. And if Shadow dies first, Lily won't survive either. The room fell silent, broken only by the wind howling outside like a morning cry. Then Logan spoke, a reckless, dangerous idea bursting from his lips. There's one way. A cross-species bone marrow transplant. Shadow donating stem cells to Lily. Lily to Shadow. They might save each other, or fall together. Rachel shook her head in horror. A cat donating marrow to a human? No one's ever done that. It's against every medical law. Logan locked eyes with her, unblinking. But they're not ordinary human and beast. They are two halves of one soul. Silence crushed the room. Then, from the shadows, another voice, deep, steady, rose. Joseph Greyfeather, the elder of the local Native American tribe, who had once warned Rachel. Science may bind the blood, he said. But to truly save them, you'll need the blessing of the spirits. He placed a wooden bowl on the table, filled with aromatic herbs, and gently lit a fire. The small flame grew, dancing warmly, pulsing like a heartbeat in the dark. Tonight, Joseph whispered, like the voice of the forest wind, we will perform the covenant ritual. We will call upon the wild spirits to witness. If they consent, we will begin a transplant never before seen in history. Rachel looked at Lily, her fragile daughter, lost in an exhausted sleep, and then she pictured Shadow's fierce, unwavering amber eyes behind that iron cage so long ago. She knew there was no turning back. No matter how insane, no matter how dangerous, she would fight for Lily, at any cost. And so, in the deep darkness of the Pine Grove woods, as the wind moaned through the ancient pines, an ancient ritual was kindled. Within a circle of stone and flame, a human child and a wild spirit bowed their heads to fate. And their destiny, bound by blood, soul, and forces older than any language ever spoken by man, began to turn. The night before the surgery, the sky over Pine Grove turned the color of charcoal. The stars flickered faintly behind a veil of mist, silent witnesses to the unprecedented event about to unfold. Deep within the wildest stretch of Wild Haven Reserve, where the pines grew thick and the wind howled like ancient sorrow, the covenant ritual began. There was no music, no thundering prayers. Only the ancient circle of stones, the flicker of a sacred fire, and the unseen spirits of the forest listening in silence. Lily Carter, frail, pale, but her eyes burning bright, sat facing Shadow, massive, silver-striped, his golden eyes weary but unbroken. Her tiny hand trembled as she reached out. And Shadow, with a gentleness unthinkable for a wild creature, lowered his great head into her palm. Joseph Greyfeather stepped forward, murmuring an ancient incantation, words older than history, passed down only by voice through countless generations. He took a pinch of ash from the sacred fire, and gently smeared it onto Lily's wrist, where the faint bobcat paw birthmark glowed softly under the firelight. Then, with his other hand, he touched Shadow's chest, right above his slow, steady beating heart. 2 souls. 1 heartbeat. 1 path. The fire flared high, casting sparks into the swirling wind. And for a moment, Rachel could swear she saw it, a thin red thread connecting Lily's wrist to Shadow's heart, pulsing like a living breath. The forest held its breath. And then, everything fell silent. The next morning, the surgery began. Wild Haven Reserve, on that day, was no longer just a wildlife sanctuary. It became a field hospital, a place where science, faith, and desperation collided. 2 operating rooms side by side, one for Lily, one for Shadow. A mixed team of pediatricians, veterinarians, immunologists, and geneticists worked under crushing tension. Logan Pierce, leading the procedure, checked everything one last time. If the marrow transplant failed, both would die. If the bodies rejected the foreign cells, both would die. But if a miracle occurred. First hour. Lily's blood flowed out, bright red and delicate as a flower petal. Shadow's bone marrow, carefully harvested and triple filtered, was infused into her fragile body through the foreline. Third hour. A portion of Lily's marrow, extracted with painstaking care, was infused into Shadow. 2 lives, 1 human, 1 bobcat, exchanged the seeds of life. Each beep of the monitors echoed like a massive heartbeat through the sterile operating rooms. Rachel never tore her gaze from the glass that separated her from the surgical ward. Margaret Ellis stood beside her, hands clenched until they turned white. Joseph Greyfeather knelt, head bowed low, murmuring prayers into the earth. Time thickened, dragging slowly like sap through the ancient pines. And then, a sound. The steady beep of Lily's heart monitor. 1 beat. 2 beats. 5 beats. Shadow, in the next room, shuddered. His once dull fur shimmered faintly, as if lit by a hidden sun filtering through the forest canopy. Logan nearly collapsed with relief. "We did it," he whispered. Rachel broke down in tears, covering her face with her trembling hands. No further words were needed. Lily and Shadow had survived. But recovery was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, Lily still faced fevers, pain, and exhaustion. Shadow, too, remained frail and thin, but his golden eyes never strayed from Lily's shadow whenever she came near the recovery pen. One day, Rachel wheeled Lily's fragile body closer to Shadow's enclosure. Struggling, moving slow and painfully, Shadow rose to his feet. Step by step, he pressed his nose against the glass. And Lily, her hand still trembling, lifted it to meet his. No words. No tears. Only the pure, deep connection that no scar, no pain, no force of the world could ever sever. 1 heartbeat. 1 soul. An eternal promise to the ancient forest. Spring returned to Pine Grove like a miracle. The snow melted, revealing earth rich with the scent of pine resin and fresh grass. The cold wind softened, carrying the fragrance of early wildflowers. At Wild Haven, life began to stir again, not just in the forest, but in hearts that had once withered. Lily Carter, now stronger than ever, walked slowly but steadily along the winding trails of the sanctuary. The old red scarf had been replaced by a handcrafted bracelet, woven from pinewood beads, a gift from Joseph Greyfeather after the ritual. Beside her, Shadow moved gracefully. His silver-striped coat shimmered under the spring sun, and though the marks of illness remained, heavier breath, slower steps, his golden eyes still burned bright with life. No more iron cages between them. No more guns lurking in the shadows. Only freedom, and the unbreakable thread binding 2 lives together. From a distance Rachel watched, her heart overflowing with a pride too vast for words. She had fought for her daughter, and in return, she had received something greater than life itself. Hope. Margaret Ellis, with help from Logan and Rachel, founded the Bridge program, a special initiative for children with autism, PTSD, and deep emotional scars. The program allowed them to interact safely with wildlife, guided by trained specialists. At just 7 years old, Lily became the program's youngest ambassador. Every afternoon after school, she would lead new children to meet Shadow and the other animals, patiently teaching them how to read body language, how to listen to the silence, that silence which often spoke louder than any words. And then, another miracle happened. One early morning, Margaret discovered that Shadow had become a father. One of the sanctuary's purebred bobcats, though kept safely in captivity, had unexpectedly given birth. Among the litter was one very special cub. Smaller than the others, with a silvery gold coat, sharp tufted ears, and golden eyes as deep as a dawnlit lake. When Lily first entered the birthing enclosure, the tiny bobcat crept toward her. No fear. No hesitation. And then, with a pure, familiar gesture, the little cub lifted one tiny paw and placed it gently into Lily's open palm, just as Shadow had done years before. Lily smiled, a smile bright as the first spring sunlight. "She remembers," Lily whispered, stroking the cub's fur as soft as clouds. "She remembers our red thread." They named the little bobcat Ember, the glowing ember left from the sacred fire that once burned between Shadow and Lily. A spark that would never die. A new generation, extending the bridge between humankind and the wild. One summer afternoon, as the sunlight painted the pine forests in gold, Lily led a new group of children into Wild Haven. Shadow, now older, lay lazily in the shade, watching the children with warm, patient eyes. Ember, mischievous and curious, darted around Lily's legs like a living memory. Lily paused at the forest's edge, where the pines whispered ancient lullabies. She turned back, smiling at the children, raising her arm, where the bobcat paw birthmark still lingered, faint but never fading. "We were born different," Lily said, her voice carrying on the wind. "Not to be feared, but to find what others cannot see." Behind her, Shadow lifted his head. Ember sat down, tail flicking playfully. And the children, each bearing invisible scars of their own, listened in rapt silence. Among the ancient pines, the winds and the light, those marked by difference had found their place. A place where being different was not a burden, but a bridge between hearts and the wild. A place called home.